Sultanbathri, India is a place that's got an unusual mix of both the old and the new, ancient and modern. Cut into the wild jungle are patches of farmland, little towns bustling with people, and even temples built hundreds of years ago by ancestors that no one can name anymore. In one of these little patches lived Thadathil Prajesh on his dairy farm. He'd inherited the business from his father, as his father did before him, and he liked his hardworking yet simple life very much. He was just far enough out of reach that the busy lives of the townspeople didn't bother him, and his quiet little family too much. Here was where Thadathil woke up to the surrounding wilderness where he was born 36 years ago. He'd spent his childhood working on the farm and playing in the trees and the waterfalls within walking distance from his house, the same house that he was now raising his own children in. He woke up every morning to the sounds of the cows in the pen and the birds out in the wild. Every morning, he got into his Jeep and drove out to do the morning chores while his wife prepared breakfast. Then, at around noon, he returned for lunch before heading out to the very edge of the farm. And there he spent the next hour or two of his day cutting down grass for his cows. He loaded his Jeep until it nearly overflowed. The grass kept the cows occupied until the next morning, until he started the ritual all over again. It was the 9th of December, 2023, and Thadathil went about his morning routine like he did every day before. His wife woke him with a cup of hot chai, and by the time she'd started cooking breakfast while nursing a fussy and teething baby, he was already starting up the Jeep. After the busy morning was behind him, he returned home for lunch and enjoyed a few minutes with his children, making the baby laugh and teaching his two older boys how to make slingshots out of some rubber cut from an old tire and a few good Y-shaped branches that he cut down for them. He left the boys to their target practice and set out in his trusty Jeep again to go and collect his herd's fodder. Thadathil drove for 10 minutes before stopping right at the edge of the tree line, but something was already waiting for him. He didn't know it, but for the past 4 days, the farmer had been watched closely by a male Siberian tiger from inside the jungle. The observant cat noticed that the man had a system that he followed religiously. He'd cut grass, load the Jeep, and when he returned the next day, Thadathil started cutting grass right next to the spot he'd last cut from. That way, he systematically cleared every square inch around his farm in increments, and by the time he'd come full circle, the place he'd started at had a fresh new patch of grass growing for his cows again. Every day that he returned, the cat was waiting in front of the section where he'd be working. And sure enough, like clockwork, Thadathil arrived and cleared a few feet of growth with his scythe, right in front of the tiger watching from the trees. After clearing some growth, he sat down with his back to the trees and started making bundles that he tied with blades of grass before loading them into the back of his Jeep. The predator waited until the man placed the scythe on top of the vehicle. The animal wasn't stupid. It knew very well that the seemingly primitive tool was incredibly dangerous. If that long blade could slice through grass and bush as smoothly as it did, it would slice through a living animal too. So it waited patiently until the potential weapon was well out of the human's reach before it started to slink out of the bushes from where it was hiding. Thadathil was whistling a nursery rhyme he'd learned as a boy, lost in his thoughts and the task at hand. All the while, the animal crept up closer and closer behind him. Its paws were silent as they sidestepped the sticks and leaves that littered the ground. Its shoulders were hunched, ready to pounce. With a final twitch of its tail, the beast let out a roar that sent the birds in the nearby trees into the air. Thadathil turned sharply at the sudden sound, and to his horror, the tiger was already right above him. Its extended claws were held wide, and its jaws were already open as it fell on top of him. Thadathil was pounded onto his back, and the pair of them skidded over the ground, leaving a groove in the earth as they went. The beast was aiming for his throat, but Thadathil turned around just as it landed on him, so its teeth sank into the man's face instead. Vicious and frenzied, the animal shook its prey. Thotathil screamed as his skin was torn from his skull. One of the tiger's claws was tearing through his back, and the other was hooked into the space between his shoulder and neck. Desperately, Thotathil clawed at the massive animal on top of him, but all his hands managed to get a hold of were clumps of orange and black fur. It wasn't the bite on his head that killed Thotathil. It was the single nail that managed to embed into his neck. The femoral artery was punctured, and he bled out, but not before the skin on his face was entirely ripped off the bone. When the man finally went limp, the tiger dragged him into the midst of the trees where it could eat in peace, with no fear of any more humans coming along to disturb it. Thotathil's wife knew something was wrong when night fell, and her husband hadn't returned for dinner. She didn't waste time trying to search for him in the dark. With 3 young children in tow, she called the authorities and every neighbor in the vicinity. The search party found the jeep almost immediately. The pool of blood on the ground next to a bundle of grass shimmered in their torchlights. From there, it didn't take them long to find Thotathil's remains just a few feet from the car. He'd been decapitated, and his left leg was gnawed off entirely. There were shreds of ginger and black hair embedded under his nails. For the next 3 days, while the Prajesh family prepared for his funeral, authorities tried to track the tiger. By the size of the paw prints, they were certain that they were looking for a fully grown male, but they just couldn't track where the beast went in the thick overgrowth of the jungle. But everyone in the area knows that once a tiger kills a human, it always comes back to bring more people to their terrifying final affliction.
On the morning of June 5th, 2022, 43-year-old Mukesh Rai and his wife, 39-year-old Gudia Rai, had gone to pray at the Kurmai temple in the central Indian state of Madhya Pradesh. The area is known for its varied topography, including river valleys, small peaks, and dense forests. More than a third of this large Indian state is covered in trees and is populated by a wide range of flora and fauna not found anywhere else across the country. The forests are home to animals like the porcupine, fox, wild boars, bison, and the infamous Indian sloth bear. The sloth bear is one of 8 species of bears and is a native of the Indian subcontinent. The animal is a vicious predator, weighing close to an American black bear at around 300 pounds and measuring over 6 feet in length. It is distinguished by its disproportionately large claws relative to its body size. These claws can be more than 5 inches long and are a natural adaptation to dig up termite mounds and insects. They are also a formidable weapon in case of an attack, helping the bear rip through skin and open up its prey's body with one deep scratch. A disturbing fact about the sloth bear is that it is known to be the most aggressive to humans among bears around the world. They see humans as not much more than a frail and slow prey that can make for an easy meal. On that fateful early morning at 6 a.m., Mukesh and Gudia decided to go on a stroll a few kilometers outside their house and visit the Kurmai temple nearby to pray. The place was several minutes away by foot, and the couple thought this was a good time to catch up with a romantic walk on their way to the temple. However, the path they intended to take went through the thick forests of the Panna National Park, and they were blissfully unaware of the danger of walking through it alone in the early hours of the day. Sloth bears are nocturnal animals that hide and sleep in the jungle for most of the day, but it was still regarded unsafe to tread amongst the trees at the crack of dawn when the bears were likely still awake. At 6:30, Mukesh and Gudia made their way back from the temple. The area was mostly empty and the town had not yet woken up. Bears were the last thing on their mind as they took their first steps towards their house. The couple walked among the forest, making their way through the branches and fallen trees. The place was eerily silent, unusual for the bustling and busy central Indian city. They were only about half a mile from their house when they heard some commotion among the leaves. Mukesh looked around but dismissed the sound as a farmer or gardener working at the park. Then, as they were less than 2 kilometers from home, Mukesh heard a terrifying growl from his left. He looked and saw a large mass of black fur jump at his wife Gudia. The scene turned from a calm ambience into a nightmare within seconds as his wife screamed and pleaded for help. The bear had lunged at her out of nowhere, taking aim for her neck and plunging its sharp claws deep into her neck. She was overcome with the massive weight of the bear and collapsed to the ground. Blood sprayed out of her neck as Mukesh screamed at the top of his lungs, trying to scare the animal away. The bear displayed an eerie behavior unlike a hungry predator would, almost acting possessed and malevolent. It tried to scratch at Gudia's torso and face, inflicting as much pain as it possibly could. Mukesh was frozen in fear for a short few seconds, watching his wife being devoured by a vicious forest predator. Gudia was being mauled and eaten alive, with the bear growling at her with every piece of flesh it bit off. Mukesh looked around for large rocks and managed to throw them at the bear from a distance, but the bear refused to let go, as bite marks and claw scratches started to fill Gudia's body. She lay there on the forest floor in a pool of blood, losing consciousness fast. Mukesh cried and called for help, but it seemed as though there was no one hearing his screams. He realized no help was coming, and it was down to him to save his wife's life. He jumped at the bear from behind, trying to tackle and punch it. The bear was momentarily thrown off, stepping away a few feet. Mukesh saw the opportunity to drag his wife to safety and pulled her blood-sodden body by the hand away from the bear, but the respite was short-lived. The animal ran toward him and jumped at him in a similar fashion as it did with Gudia. It immediately went for the neck, trying to end his life as swiftly as possible. Its razor-sharp claws plunged deep into Mukesh's soft neck, damaging his spine and nerves and paralyzing him. Their fate had now been sealed, as Gudia had lost consciousness and Mukesh lay paralyzed and helpless, bleeding away as the bear circled their dying bodies in a cynical fashion. Villagers nearby had heard the commotion by this time and reached the spot where the screams were coming from. What they witnessed at the spot was a gruesome sight. The bear guarded the couple's bodies, refusing to let go. It had dragged them to a pool of water a few feet away and nibbled and chewed at their bodies, taking out chunks of flesh bit by bit. The villagers tried to scare away the bear, throwing rocks at it in hopes that it would run away so something from their dead bodies could be salvaged. But the animal did not budge, and gunmen had to be called onto the scene to shoot the bear dead. The bear displayed erratic behavior, pulling their arms and smelling their bodies while showing frantic and jittery body movements. The bystanders and authorities tried to scare the bear away without having to kill it so they could study its odd behavior. After 5 hours of the terrifying ordeal, the animal was finally tranquilized and transported to a nearby vet research center for analysis. It was later found that the bear was in the final stage of rabies and had launched the attack out of confusion and irritation. It was in pain from the infection and likely did not kill the couple to eat them. After only a few hours in captivity, the bear died from rabies. But the news spread to the park rangers, who were ordered to close the park immediately and call back anyone working there. Fear of the infection spreading took over the town, and hundreds more animals had to be tested to make sure nothing else had contracted rabies. Authorities claimed that increasing deforestation had forced the bears to come closer and closer to human settlements in search of food. The central Indian state records some of the highest instances of bear attacks around the world due to the proximity of bear and human populations and the lack of proper regulation and safety measures. The attack was also attributed to the time of the year, as June was the month of the mahua tree flowering, where bears would come to feed on the trees and humans would try and harvest them for profit. It was a chain of unfortunate events that brought the sloth bear and the couple dangerously close, compounded by the disease the animal was suffering from. The news of the deaths spread across the country, and the gory nature of the attack added to the fear of bears in human populations that lived nearby. More than 50 sloth bear attacks had been recorded in the state consistently for 6 years since 2015, with several people in the area showing damaged limbs, scratches, and bite marks. The Indian government gave the family of the couple 400,000 Indian rupees in compensation, equivalent to around $5,000 US. But the news of the death devastated friends and family of the deceased. Their bodies could not be identified until later the next day, as their faces and bodies had been mauled beyond recognition. For Mukesh and Gudia, a casual morning stroll turned into a harrowing ordeal within a few minutes as they died trying to save each other while being torn apart by a formidable forest predator, bringing them both to their terrifying final affliction.
Prahlad Gujar was a bit of a man-child. Now in his late 30s, he'd never bothered to marry or really do a great deal to work himself up at the Rajasthan municipality where he worked as a member of the maintenance crew. It's not that Prahlad was necessarily a bad guy. He'd just always been a little unfocused on moving forward, with a lot more interest in having fun and enjoying life. We all know someone like him, and for all his lack of drive, he was actually a pleasant individual who made friends easily. Prahlad was the life of the party, and he made a point of having a good time every weekend. And when he did get some time off, he'd rather join in on a good party than to visit his rather traditional and stern family in the southern point of India. That was exactly the case in February 2024. He was supposed to take the week off to attend his niece's wedding, but Prahlad decided instead to lie to his parents and siblings, saying that he never managed to get the week off. But he was, in fact, cleared for the short holiday, and he was planning on spending it with some buddies, painting the town red. And oh boy, did they have a good time. From sunup to sundown, the group of overgrown man-children visited the parks and rivers. For 5 days, from Monday to Friday, they spent the day in good spirits, slept wherever there was room for them at night, only to get up the next morning to do it all over again. One by one, the friends dropped off. They just didn't have the stamina to keep up with the hard partying until Saturday, when Prahlad got up and it was only him who was left on the booze brigade. He hopped around the local bars looking for any familiar faces and working up a good buzz before noon. Eventually, he had to accept that all of his buddies had faded out, but that didn't bother Prahlad too much. He had enough beer in him to go out and have fun without them. Prahlad was much more inebriated than anyone realized. The woman at the ticket booth didn't even notice any unsteadiness or unusual behavior from him. Sri Venkateswara Zoological Park regularly showed drunk visitors away at the entrance gates, keeping the place as family-friendly as possible. Had they seen any unusual behavior from him, he would have been shown the door before he could even step foot inside the park. It didn't take Prahlad long to get bored of the monkeys and the gazelles. He began to wander off to the predator enclosures, but the bears and the smaller cats were just as uneventful for him. Prahlad did take a few selfies of himself in front of the cages to send off to his friends to show them what they were missing out on. And when he got no replies from any of them, he decided to up the ante a little. He went straight for the lion enclosures. In the main path, a male lion and his lioness were on display for park visitors. Prahlad got up right to their fence line to get a better picture with them. A security guard rushed forward and chased him away. The signs were clear as day. No one was allowed to get within 8 feet of the wire that kept them safe from the animals. The security guard was not as easily fooled as the lady at the entrance was. He immediately realized that Prahlad was going to be trouble. Sanji dealt with teenage hooligans, attention-seeking social media influencers, and drunkards every day. He could spot a troublemaker a mile away. Prahlad just couldn't shake the tail. That guard made sure that he kept Prahlad in his sights from the moment he chased him away from the first cage. But Prahlad had other ideas. Just behind the first cage, almost completely hidden from view, was another. This enclosure was not for the public to visit. It was where new arrivals that needed to get used to the environment were placed, or animals that were sick or injured. Again, the signs were clear. Only staff were allowed to even go down the path that led to the temporary housing unit, never mind go to the cage itself. Prahlad waited until the guard's attention was subverted by another visitor who was asking for directions. He took off running before the guard could turn back around. Right next to the holding stood a large water tank that supplied the cages in the nearby vicinity. Prahlad climbed it, getting himself high enough to look 12 feet down into the space where 2 lionesses and a fully grown male lion lay baking in the sun. The guard turned back just in time to see Prahlad on top of the tank, and he immediately grabbed his radio calling for backup as he ran full speed at the mad man on top of the water tank. Prahlad, laughing with glee, jumped straight down without a second thought, landing squarely in between the 3 lions, with his phone in his hand, ready to snap a picture of 2 before the guards could remove him from the cage. What happened next shouldn't surprise any of you. The male lion immediately pounced on Prahlad, grabbing him by the left shoulder. The laughter died in Prahlad's throat and turned into a panicked scream of terror. His sudden descent into the lion's den was more of a shock for the animals than anything else, and the lion's jaws merely glanced off Prahlad's shoulder, not taking hold fully. Prahlad, bleeding, screaming, and utterly hysterical with pain and fear, attempted to run. He actually made it to the nearest tree, but before he could even get to the lowest branches, a claw hooked his ankle, yanking him off the trunk and sending him skidding through the grass and sand. That lion wasn't even hungry. It was well fed, and in the middle of the day, it was at its laziest and least likely to strike. But when a warm, living body falls from the sky, what else is a predator to do but chase it down? The guard didn't even make it to the fence line before Prahlad's screams were cut short. The animal grabbed him by the throat again. This time his bite was fatal. The jaws bore down so hard that Prahlad's neck was broken before he could suffocate or bleed out. Those cats, still full from their morning meal, didn't even bother to eat at him. But they did stand guard over their kill for 2 hours until a park worker was able to coax them with food into a treatment cell off to the side. By the time authorities could get inside to remove the body, Prahlad was in pieces. The cats hadn't really eaten him, but they did use those 2 hours to play, and play with his corpse they sure did. The coroner had to collect shards and scraps of bone spread out in an 8-foot radius around the body. The parks kept the male lion off in the holding cages for observation, but so far he hasn't shown any signs of unusual aggression, except frustration for being kept in the cramped temporary cages reserved for sick and injured animals. They've been adamant that they won't kill the lion. The only crime that was committed here was the unbelievably foolish actions committed by Prahlad. They plan on letting him out after 2 months, at which time the lion will be free to join his girls again and hopefully live a more peaceful life in his spacious, permanent accommodations. Considering how unlikely it would be that someone else like Prahlad Gujarat would sneak into its cage, he will probably be the only one the lion brings to his terrifying final affliction. The goonch, otherwise known as the giant devil catfish, is a very large species of catfish. It is native to India and has caused quite a stir owing to its immense size. Some grow as long as an adult human and weigh in excess of 220 pounds, 100 kilograms. Between 1998 and 2007, the villages along the Kali River were plagued by mysterious disappearances. Firstly, in April 1998, a group of friends were bathing in the murky waters of the river. As they splashed about just feet from the muddy bank, something approached from the depths. It had a taste for human flesh. The burnt remains of people discarded from funeral pyres along the river had been washed into the water. The predator, typically a piscivore, had grown to an exceptional size. It was larger than any specimen ever recorded before. With one gulp from its enormous mouth, it sucked one of the boys, 17-year-old Dil Bahadur, underwater right before his friends. He managed to let out half a cry before he disappeared from sight. His friends leapt out of the water and immediately raised the alarm. A search ensued, but despite 3 days of scouring the river and its banks, no trace of the boy was ever found. It was a mystery as to what had taken Dil. His friends hadn't seen the knobbly back of a crocodile or the dorsal fin of a bull shark. The currents in the river were non-existent in that particular stretch. Something out of the ordinary had taken him that afternoon, but nobody knew what. The river was considered relatively safe for locals to swim and bathe in, but just 3 months later, the mysterious creature struck again. This time it took place at Dharma Ghat. A man and his young son were bathing in the water. Their splashes were detected by the covert predator, and it moved in for the kill. Silently and rapidly, the young boy was pulled under the water just feet from his horrified father. The man scrabbled about in the river, trying desperately to grab hold of his son, but the brown water made it impossible to see. Yet another frantic search ensued, but no remains of the boy were ever found. People became cautious about entering the river. What had once been a safe and enjoyable activity was now something that could cost them their lives. But as the months passed and turned into years, people began to feel safe again in the Kali River. Whilst the families of those who disappeared would never forget, others did, until the creature struck again. This time, in 2007, an 18-year-old Nepalese man was enjoying the river amongst friends when he suddenly felt something grab him around the waist. In an instant, he was pulled below the surface of the water and disappeared without a trace. When word spread about the mysterious river monster, British biologist Jeremy Wade offered to investigate. He was determined to catch whatever it was that was responsible for the attacks. No one had seen anything other than a flash of gray when one of the victims was dragged down. It wasn't much to go on. But what Jeremy did was consider all the things it could possibly be. He examined the stretch of river where the attacks had taken place. It was only a 4-mile length of river. At first, he thought the most likely explanation was a whirlpool or unexpected water currents. For the victims to be dragged underwater almost silently, without a ferocious amount of splashing, as is often the case with a shark attack, water currents seemed to be the logical explanation. But that particular stretch of river had no turbulence in it. Intrigued by the mystery, Jeremy began listening to villagers. Many of them believed it was a goonch. During his investigation, a domestic water buffalo weighing 350 pounds, 160 kilograms, was dragged into the water as it took a drink in the shallows. For an animal that size to be seized by a predator, Jeremy estimated the catfish needed to be 300 pounds, 135 kilograms. He now knew that he was looking for a monster. Saltwater crocodiles were dismissed as they never traveled that far upriver. Gharials didn't have a large enough jaw to take a grown man, and the water was too cold for mugger crocodiles. No locals had ever seen crocodiles basking on the banks in the sun either. Bull sharks were also dismissed, as it was so far upriver, and nobody had ever seen a dorsal fin break the surface, despite the shallow water where the attacks took place. Maybe the locals were right. Maybe the giant devil catfish was responsible. Jeremy set up a funeral pyre to lure one of the catfish. Sure enough, a record-breaking goonch was captured the next day. It measured 6 feet 7 inches and weighed 160 pounds, 73 kilograms. It was certainly large enough to take a small child, but to take a fully grown man and a water buffalo, the goonch would have to be much larger. The cases have remained unsolved, but after the investigations, most, including Jeremy, believe that the goonch was responsible for the attacks that brought so many people in the river to their terrifying final affliction. The tales of man-eating tigers have brought fear to all those who have heard them. There is an innate fear that grips a community as one by one they are picked off by a top predator under cover of darkness. It's the stuff of nightmares. Even today, plenty of rural communities in India and Southeast Asia are under threat of tiger attacks. Although not considered typical prey, humans are easy targets for these apex predators. Locals know of the dangers when they go about their everyday lives. The Sundarbans, situated in the Bay of Bengal, are world famous for their tiger attacks. In fact, it is estimated that up to 50 people each year are killed by tigers in this region. As fishermen venture further into the mangrove swamps, they are often plucked from their boats by the elusive beasts, never to be seen again. But these two new incidents in today's episode have happened further north. In April 2023, 2 tiger attacks shook local communities in northwestern India. The 2 attacks occurred within days of each other, sparking fears that a new man-eater was on the prowl. The deaths of the 2 men sent locals into a panic, and families feared for their loved ones working in the open fields surrounding their villages. The reaction was strong. The threat of further attacks was very real, and so local government imposed curfews and shut down schools. Tigers have been known to be some of the deadliest killers on Earth, with some of these man-eaters reaching death counts into the hundreds. The first victim was a 72-year-old called Birendra Singh. He left his home on April 13, 2023, never to be seen alive again. His destination was the farmland surrounding his home. His fields were close to the Corbett Tiger Reserve, the first national park to be established in India. It is thought to be home to more than 250 Bengal tigers. Over the years, some of these tigers have escaped into surrounding farmland. With little wildlife to feast upon, they turned to other forms of prey. Villagers had seen tigers moving amongst the shadows in recent days. They had caught glimpses of their telltale stripes between the trees, the movement of the long grass as the animals slunk away, the ravaged corpses of livestock pulled into the undergrowth. In the previous week alone, 6 cattle had been killed and eaten by a tiger. The people knew they were in danger. As dusk was settling in, Birendra was out in his fields harvesting his wheat crop. He had worked his entire life to provide for his family. He knew his fields like the back of his hand. He had lived through tough times, through drought and through floods, but he had survived them all. As he toiled the land, something lurked in the bushes, a predator that had been drawn to the open fields and the hunting opportunities there. Cattle were easy prey. So were people. At 6 p.m., the tiger ran from the undergrowth. It leapt on top of the unsuspecting Birendra. He was instantly floored, and the wind knocked from his lungs as he grappled with the enormous cat. It delivered its fatal bite moments later. The 72-year-old was dead. He hadn't stood a chance. He had died alone and at work. Nobody heard his cries. Nobody came to his rescue. The tiger dragged his limp body into the surrounding woodland to eat at its leisure. Villagers grew worried when Birendra didn't return home that evening. Armed with burning torches, they began to search the farmland. They knew something must have happened to him. He never stayed out past daylight hours. It was too dangerous. After searching for 2 hours, they found a disturbed patch of earth, the trail of flattened vegetation that led into the bushes. Lowering their burning branches to the ground, the flames illuminated the remains of Birendra. By the flickering light, they could see that his head had been partially eaten. His injuries were reminiscent of a tiger attack. The man's death sent shockwaves through the local community, but that wasn't to be the end of it. There was more to come. Just 3 days later, another attack occurred in a neighboring village, also in close proximity to the Corbett Tiger Reserve. Ranveer Singh Negi hadn't been answering his phone calls. His family grew worried about the 75-year-old's whereabouts. He lived alone at his home in Simli village in the Kalagarth Forest Division. When he didn't respond for 2 days, his family called villagers to check on him. Dutifully, they inspected his property. Ranveer was nowhere to be seen. But then they spotted something that made them freeze in their tracks. There was a trail of blood just yards from his house. The villagers followed the trail until it led them to some bushes 160 yards away. Carefully, they pulled back the branches and peered inside. There, lying on the ground, was the severely mauled body of Ranveer. Almost half of his entire body had been eaten. It was clear that it had been a tiger attack. A silent, deadly predator was lurking amongst them, one which could take a man without anyone knowing about it, killing a person with one fatal bite to the neck. There were no screams. Nobody had heard a commotion, and yet the 75-year-old had been taken just yards from his home. With the fear that a man-eater was on the loose, officials started to take action. People were advised not to enter the woodland or go out alone. The local district magistrate imposed a strict curfew on 25 villages in the area. Nobody was allowed out of their homes between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. every day, the 11 hours of darkness during which tigers are most likely to hunt. But people still had work to do. They still needed to venture into the forest to find fodder for their livestock. Without it, their animals would die. Without them, so would they. The Animal Husbandry Department began leaving animal fodder on people's doorsteps to prevent the need for them to forage in the surrounding woodland. It isn't the first time a tiger has escaped from the reserve. Only the year before, two friends were motorcycling along a road when a tiger leapt from the bushes. It grabbed one of the men mid-air and dragged him off, never to be seen again. The next of kin of those killed were given financial compensation. This is something that is common throughout India when a tiger strikes. But no one can rest knowing there is a potential man-eater prowling their villages. In the past, there have been occasions when tigers have ventured into people's homes, taking them from their beds as they slept. Nobody was safe. Nowhere was safe. Wildlife officials set up a cage in one of the villages with the attempt to catch the tiger. After a few days, they caught one and tranquilized it before returning it to the reserve. But there were still sightings in the farmland surrounding the villages. 3 additional cages were set up in Dala and Simli villages where the 2 men were killed. 20 camera traps were put out in the area. The hunt for the loose tiger or tigers was on. The question on everyone's lips was, could they catch the tiger before it struck again? Kota Ulis Karanth, a zoologist and tiger expert, has spent more than 30 years in the field studying tigers. He has seen hundreds of them up close during this time, and nearly all of them slink away at the first whiff of a human. They are fearful of people, but for a few rogue individuals, they have, for some reason or another, lost that fear. Some that take an opportunity to hunt humans can develop a taste for human blood. They actively seek out people, and these become known as man-eaters, the most feared of their kind. If it's the same tiger responsible for these 2 attacks, could it be heading towards man-eater status? Has it developed a taste for human blood? At the time of the making of this video, the investigation is still ongoing. The tiger or tigers responsible for the 2 men's death is still on the loose. There is no stopping a man-eater once it has turned to humans. The only way to deal with one is to kill it before it does the same to you, bringing another victim to their horrifying final affliction. India is known for many things: a rich cultural heritage, breathtaking scenery, diverse religious and ethnic groups, and of course, one of the best cuisines in the world. Despite all the wonderful aspects of India, it's home to a large number of dangerous animals, such as deadly snakes and massive crocodiles. The latter has been causing an increasing amount of trouble in some of the local villages, so much so that it's thought that crocodiles are killing about 10 people per year in the country. That being said, many crocodilian species are protected by law, and even if you are attacked by one, it would be illegal to kill it to save your life. In this circumstance, it seems that the reptile would have more rights to live than you would. This is something that a small village in Gujarat were given to contend with when one of their farmers was dragged into a river by a hungry crocodile. The northern state of Gujarat is the 5th largest state in India and is home to over 60 million people. Although famous for its welcoming beaches and temples, it also has a very unwelcome visitor lurking in the rivers, the crocodile. As the state comprises of different local villages, it can be difficult for the government to make any meaningful changes when it comes to dealing with the hungry reptiles. The locals are instead advised not to enter the water in known crocodile habitats. This isn't always possible for the villagers, since some of them are forced into the water for multiple reasons, from bathing to livestock care. With the crocodile population seemingly skyrocketing over the last few decades, the water has become more and more dangerous for the locals. While the true population of crocodiles is difficult to calculate, it's thought that there are over 1,000 crocodiles in the Vadodara district, with the majority living in the Vishwamitra River. Unfortunately for 55-year-old Reji Vasava, this was exactly where he worked as a farm laborer, where he'd soon meet an untimely and vicious end. On Friday the 19th of September in 2014, Reji woke up early as usual and began to get ready for the day. He was a farm laborer, and today he would have to tend to his employer's cattle, taking them down to the Vishwamitra River to graze at the banks. This was his favorite daily task, since his friends, who also worked down at the bank, always left him in a good mood. As he walked behind the cattle, herding them along the path, the river opened up in front of him. As they were slowly grazing, Reji sat on a mound and watched them chew the grass. He would be here for a few hours, so decided he would get comfortable. Passers-by came and went, saying hello to him as they passed. After some time, he heard one of the buffalo in distress by the water's edge, seemingly being pulled down into the water, but he couldn't see what was happening. He could see blood start to run from the animal's leg and thought that he had been struck by something, or it had tripped on the riverbank. Knowing that his employer would be upset if anything happened to his buffaloes, Reji headed towards the wounded animal, hoping to be able to simply pull it from the water and assess the damage. Little did he know, a 14-foot crocodile would be waiting behind the cattle, ready to strike. Reji rushed into the water to pull the buffalo to safety, when he suddenly noticed what was attached to the animal. The massive reptile had grabbed onto the leg of the buffalo and was attempting to pull it off as it turned sharply in the water. Knowing that he only had a short time before the reptile won the fight, Reji began to pull his animal from the water and tried to get it back onto dry land. That's when he felt it, a powerful bite that tore into his leg and clasped him tight. He knew exactly what had happened. The crocodile had decided that he would be its next meal rather than the buffalo. Panicked, Reji shouted out for help to the other people along the riverside, hoping that someone would be able to get to him in time to save him from a watery grave. The crocodile started to drag him out to deeper water, clearly trying to finish him off before anyone had the chance to notice. As he was pulled further and further from the riverbank, he could feel the reptile begin to spin as it attempted to pull his limbs from his body. He could hear people running and shouting from the other side of the river, but he already knew that they were too late. He was in too deep, and the crocodile had already begun to dismember him as his blood began to stain the muddy water a deep red color. He was already becoming weaker, and the reptile continued to drag him under the water, keeping him just shy of the surface in a concentrated effort to drown the man. It succeeded. The villagers ran to the riverbank, horrified to see that one of their own was fighting against such a massive animal. They struggled to keep track of them both as the crocodile pulled Reji under the water and then burst back to the surface after a few seconds. They could see the blood rushing into the water and could tell that the man was in a dire situation. He needed their help. They rushed to find whatever weapons they could, mostly settling on large sticks that were around the village. Without knowing if Reji was alive or if any other predators were lurking in the water, the villagers threw themselves into the water, screaming at the animal to leave their friend alone. When they were finally close enough, they began to viciously hit the crocodile with their sticks, landing many successful blows. They could see Reji in the water, but he wasn't fighting back or trying to swim away from his attacker. He was just floating there as they beat the crocodile with all their might. They knew what had happened. They knew Reji was dead, but continued beating the crocodile to avenge their friend, whom this animal had taken away from them. They grabbed more and more weapons, hoping to inflict as much damage as possible. The animal resisted the attack for as long as it could, but after 2 hours, the injuries that it had sustained from the villagers were too great, and the crocodile finally died. It was a brutal and unyielding attack, but the locals felt that they had avenged Reji as best they could. They dragged the bodies of both the man and the crocodile to shore so that they could fully assess the injuries. Reggie had been almost completely torn apart by the crocodile, missing several limbs, and his body was pale from blood loss. Once the bodies were back on the riverside, the group called the authorities to report that Reggie was dead. When the police arrived, they were disgusted by what they saw, but not for the reason you would think. Rather than the horror of seeing the local man dead in front of them, they were far more concerned about the dead crocodile, stating that it was a protected species. By killing the crocodile in defense of their friend, they had broken the law, which the police intended to remind them of. An offense was registered against the villagers as a warning to anyone who would try to kill another crocodile in the future, regardless of the circumstances. The results of that motion were never released, but in the past, individuals have been given a heavy fine or even imprisoned for doing the exact same thing. After the bodies were removed, people began to theorize as to why the attack even happened in the first place, and why the crocodile was in that part of the river where crocodiles are rarely reported. It was eventually decided that the crocodile had migrated downstream from Bhuj as the Sardar Sarovar Narmada Dam had been overflowing for 40 days after the last monsoon. As the rivers began to flood, lots of creatures that called the river their home were forced to move to calmer, shallower waters if they wanted to survive, which is how Reggie came face to face with the crocodile that would eventually end his life. Although he was mourned and his body was laid to rest, the locals were still worried about other crocodiles coming into their river, and they wouldn't be allowed to do anything about it. Although conservation efforts are helping to increase the number of crocodiles in Indian rivers, this is also increasing the amount of attacks on the locals living around the river. The massive man-eating crocodiles bringing more and more of them each year to their unfortunate final affliction. India's Gir National Park is the only place in the world where Asiatic lions live in the wild. Their comeback from just 50 individuals has been hailed a conservation success story, but with numbers climbing to more than 500, their population and habitat needs to be closely monitored to keep the population alive, whilst also keeping locals safe. This is something that appears to be failing at the moment. Management of the lions is controversial. Wildlife officers regularly leave out bait to entice the lions to tourist hotspots. Paying visitors pay their wages and for the conservation of the park. Keeping tourists happy and coming back for more is paramount to the park's survival. But experts warn that baiting the lions will only lead to trouble. Deadly trouble. Over time, the lions may lose their ability to hunt, relying solely on the free handouts provided by the rangers. Not only will they start associating these meals with humans, but they may turn to easier prey, such as livestock or people. A little more than 10 miles from one of the protected forests where the lions roam lies the village of Dahanfulia. 17-year-old Bhavna Baria and her cousin were working as farm laborers. Bhavna lived with her parents in Mitan village in eastern Gujarat, but she was visiting her family in Dahanfulia. She had accepted an offer to work with her mother's brother on his farm. It was hard work, but it brought in money for the family. After a long day's work, she and her cousin Rekha settled down for the night in the family's cottage. They pulled their bed covers up to their chins and rested their heads on their pillows. Just before drifting off to sleep, however, Bhavna felt the urge to use the bathroom. It was 9:30 p.m. Outside it was dark except for the moon. Everything was bathed in its silvery glow. Bhavna asked Rekha to come with her. The toilet was a short walk from where they were sleeping. It was a small shack outside, but Bhavna didn't want to go alone. The two of them opened the cottage door and stepped out into the stillness of the night. They breathed in the fresh air. The buzzing of insects filled the darkness, but there were predators on the hunt that night. The village lay on the banks of Ozat River. It was a place that was frequented by lions that weren't confined to the borders of the national park. The rushing of the water could be heard in the distance, a sound that masked any approaching predators. The girls were unaware that 2 pairs of eyes were trained on them. The reflective glare from a flashlight would have been a giveaway to the imminent danger they were in, but neither of them possessed a flashlight. Instead, they were following the narrow path by the moonlight. It wound through the field away from the safety of the house. Dark shadows surrounded them. The expanse of the fields they had been working in disappeared into the gloom. The two predators approached. Stealthily, they stalked across the open field, whilst the two girls hurried towards the shack. But before they could reach it, just yards from its door, the two cousins saw a pair of male lions sprinting towards them. Even in the murkiness, they could see their powerful forelimbs striding across the open, their huge dark manes waving with the motion of their gallop. Their eyes were fixed in a stare. There was nowhere to escape to. They couldn't make it back to the house or into the hut in time. There were no trees to climb. The seconds seemed to stand still. Although the lions were lightning fast, the two girls could see every detail in those terrifying moments. Before they launched themselves onto the girls, Rekha jumped into a water tank. She splashed into the shoulder-high water and crouched down, hardly daring to breathe. She closed her eyes and listened in terror as she heard the fate of her cousin. Bhavna wasn't so lucky. The lions had emerged out of nowhere. She didn't have time to react, and before she could escape, one of the lions grabbed her in its jaws. It instinctively went for the throat, biting down with a force of 650 psi, 3 times greater than a human's, and with canines 10 centimeters, 4 inches long. She didn't stand a chance. The bite crushed her windpipe and severed her artery. She had let out a scream moments before that pierced the dark, but now the night returned to its stillness. Bhavna no longer made a sound. She lay on the ground surrounded by the two lions as they inspected their kill. Rekha was frozen in terror. From inside the water tank, she heard the deep growling of the lions as they bit into her young cousin, tearing at her lifeless body. She then heard a scraping along the ground as they tugged at Bhavna, dragging her away into the night. They secured their prey, and now they would feast in the forest. When Rekha couldn't hear any more commotion, she tentatively peeked out over the top of the water tank. Her heart was pounding, like the beating of a drum in her ears. She listened, watching and waiting. Then, when she thought the lions had left, she clambered out of the water tank and jumped down onto the ground. She then rushed to the cottage, screaming for her parents to help. She didn't know if her cousin was dead or alive. She assumed the worst, but held onto a glimmer of hope that she could be saved if they acted quickly. She couldn't bear the thought of Bhavna being out there on her own, gravely injured. Officers of the Gir Somnath Social Forestry Division were alerted to the incident and raced to the scene. A search for Bhavna and the two lions was mounted. They followed the drag marks left by the lions and their prey, and tragically found the two big cats tucking into the body of Bhavna quite a distance away. They had dragged her off to a nearby farm. It was clear that she was no longer alive, and the officers shouted and clapped their hands loudly to try and frighten the lions away. They were two sub-adult males, likely brothers, who worked together to take down their prey. They couldn't be chased away for half an hour, by which time they had consumed the lower half of Bhavna's body. It was a gruesome sight, and one which will likely haunt all those who witnessed it. The Deputy Conservator of Forests, who works in Gir National Park, said that attacks on humans by Asiatic lions were incredibly rare. Many locals live on the outskirts of the protected forests, and although livestock are occasionally taken by lions, they rarely target people. The behavior had been uncharacteristic, and officials were working on capturing the two lions and returning them to the protected area. It is obvious that the lions make money for locals. Tourists come from far and wide to see these rare subspecies, but sometimes people take things too far. Just days before this tragic attack, locals used the lions in a sickening, viral video to make money. They tethered a cow to a tree and waited silently for a lion to approach. With their phones, they filmed the lion closing in on the cow. They streamed it live to paying customers in a shocking pay-per-view video. People from all around the world tuned in to watch as the lion dived on top of the cow and demolished her. There was no way for the cow to fight back or flee. She was tied to her position, all for the entertainment of a paying crowd. Using the lions like this is only going to lead to casualties. These illegal videos are threatening the conservation efforts of Gir National Park and putting locals and livestock at unnecessary risk. The incident was a tragedy. To lose someone so young was a shock for the entire family and the small village community. Bhavna's parents, who had remained at their home village, were informed of the terrible news, and those who knew their young daughter mourned her loss. Living in such close proximity to dangerous wildlife doesn't come without its risks. Farmland and villages are often bordering the lion's natural habitat, as both people and lions compete for space. But as the Asiatic lion population continues to swell, perhaps more needs to be done to ensure both their safety and those who share their habitat, ensuring that no one else like Bhavna Bharia meets their terrifying final affliction.